Hello, people. Welcome to my first series of Tuesday Techniques, which is here on the So Much More Fun Facebook group. It's so great to be here and to be with you. I'm hoping that this is broadcasting. This is quite new for me to do and new technology. So if you're here, then try and let me know in the chat. I'll just give it a couple of minutes while people join. I'm just going to check to make sure I can see it live that's it. Excellent. Okay, so welcome. This is the first of a series of sessions that we're going to be doing to cover live techniques on your sewing patterns. So to introduce you to commercial sewing patterns. So for any of you that might be interested in learning to sew, make your own clothes, then this is what we're going to be doing to start us off. So I've got a whole series of events, of sessions planned. Every Tuesday at 12:30. They're going to be recorded in this session, and if you're not a Facebook user, then you'll probably be watching this on the website, and I'll be posting these recordings onto the website. So each session is going to be around 35 to 45 minutes, depending on what we've got to cover. If you're watching live, then I'm using StreamYard. So if you are able to just authenticate in StreamYard, then I'll be able to see your name in the comments if you post any comments. But if you don't want to do that, then just stick your name in front of your comment so that I can see it. If you're watching this on the replay, then let me know. Type replay before you type any comments. And then if you want to ask any questions, then please do that, and I'll try my best to answer those. If you've got any questions today while we're live, then please just type them in the chat box, in the comments, and let me know what you've got to say. And if you're here, so as people start joining, if you just let me know and say hi, that would be fabulous. This is quite new technology for me, so if it kind of goes a bit wrong, then I apologize in advance, but hopefully we'll be good. Okay, so I want these sessions to be interactive. So if you've got any questions when we're live, then please do ask them, and I'll try and answer them as we go. And as I mentioned, if you're watching the replay, then type them in the comment section wherever you're watching the replay, whether that's on the website or on Facebook, and I'll do my best to come back to you with answers. Over the next few sessions, I want it to try and be interactive as well. So I'm going to give you some templates and things that you can download if you want to do that and take part. So we're going to be covering some fitting sessions, and I want to be able to share with you so you can kind of do it as we go. And if you get any wins or if you get any ahas from these sessions, then I'd really love to know about that. So if you can put those in the Facebook comments as well, or type wins in the group, or in the comments on the website as well. So let me know if anything's kind of clicked for you, or you think, yeah, that's great, that's been a really good tip, and whether you can use those as we go. Okay, so let's kick off then. So I've got a program over the next few weeks, and the program's published onto the website. I think I've also put the details in Facebook as well. So in case you want to get to those, if I just show you where they are, just go to the banners. So so it's on somuchmorefun.co.uk, and it's in a post called New Tuesday Techniques on Facebook Live. And if we just quickly run through those so that you can see them, I'm just going to share my screen. So I'm just going to share this one. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. So in here, we've just got a list of the sessions that are going to be coming up. So in November, we're going to be talking about, today we're talking about introduction to commercial sewing patterns. Then we're going to be looking at tracing off patterns, why you would do it, and tips on how to do that. And then a big thing for me, which is kind of using multi-size patterns. So it was a revelation to me when I started using multi-size patterns and worked out that I don't have to be just one size. And so I want to go through some tips on how you can do that. And then into December, we're going to be looking at what is a toile and why would you need one, and then introducing some of the common pattern alterations, including lengthening and shortening, some basic shoulder adjustments, and then some basic full and small bust adjustments. And then in the new year, I'm going to be looking at some back adjustments, so common back adjustments and sleeve adjustments, also adjustments for a full tummy. And then for those of you that might be interested in making trousers, then in February, I'm going to be going through some techniques on how to alter for trousers. So let me just stop that screen share. Okay, so they're the techniques that we're going to be covering. And if there's anything there that's not mentioned that you'd like to see, then please do just message me and let me know. And then I'll be able to try and include those for you into the program, and we can answer any questions that you might have. Okay, so moving on then. So do you use sewing patterns? Are you already using sewing patterns? If so, what patterns are you using? What have you used them for? And what's your experience with them? Just going to switch back to my comments just so that I can check in here. Yeah, so how are you interacting with patterns? Do you find them easy? Do you find them hard? Have you really struggled? What's your kind of experience of sewing patterns? So for me, I started using sewing patterns quite early on, and it was quite a challenge, I would say. The first ones that I used were kind of from my mum's stash, and I used to go and kind of hijack whatever she had in there. We'd often just cut out the size that we thought from our ready-to-wear size. So I'd say I was a size 10 or 12 or whatever it was. I would just cut out that pattern size and then try and make it up. And then realized that either it didn't fit or I couldn't use it, or it was just a real challenge. The instructions were sometimes quite difficult, and I wasn't great at picking patterns, I would say, so I had some real challenges. But these days, a few years on, I absolutely love sewing patterns. I think there are a number of benefits, and my kind of top 6 benefits are that I think they give you a massive choice. So they give you a big choice on how to choose different styles. You've got things that have already been made. You've got loads of different examples of, I mean, just such a wide variety. And even more so in the last, I'd say probably the last 5 years, when there's been a kind of upsurge in the number of independent pattern brands that are introducing new kinds of garments, you know, much more in the kind of loungewear, leisure wear, through to lingerie. And so all, you know, basically catering for all the needs. So I really love the fact that there's so much choice out there. I think they save you time. So about 10 years ago, I learned to do pattern drafting because I wanted to make my own patterns. And that really kind of demonstrated to me that it's just really hard. It's just really hard to do these patterns on your own. It's really worth it if you want to learn that and go down that route, but it can be just time consuming, really time consuming. So it really did make me appreciate that the challenges that there are when you are trying to create a pattern from scratch, even down to how to convert a design kind of from your head into a 3D pattern that's going to work for you. So patterns definitely save time. They come with instructions. So I think when you're first learning to make garments, it can be a bit of a challenge to know where to start. So which seams to sew first, how to finish the seams, how to make some of the details like pockets, vented pockets, or special collars, or different kinds of sleeves. And so with working over the years with a number of different kinds of patterns, I've actually learned a lot of different techniques just from going through and doing it from a pattern. And then I've been able to apply some of those techniques to other patterns that maybe didn't include that. So different sleeve variations, or different collar variations, or different designs in terms of pockets and things like that. So it's definitely well worth trying lots of different types of patterns, I think, because then you're going to be able to see how well how to do new techniques and how to follow those instructions. So they're also widely available, and others have made them. So one of the benefits is that you're probably not alone in wanting to make this pattern. And if you're choosing some of the more popular brands, then you'll often see the benefit that other people have gone before you, and they might have taken some photos, or they might have given you some tips, or there might be some information about what fabrics they used. And so it's really helpful to just go and have a look and see who might have made that before. And particularly with the independent pattern brands, it's also really helpful to know that they are sampling them. So they'll often have groups of testers, and these days you'll see them all with their own blogs, and they'll often go in and see the you'll be able to see all of the patterns and what the testers have made and how they've interpreted the pattern. So it's a really great way of just testing out and having a look at patterns before you actually decide. They'll come with some fabric suggestions. So all the patterns that you get tend to include some kind of fabric suggestion as to what they've been designed for. So that gives you a bit of a shortcut to know what fabrics to choose. And this is also a way that I've learned about fabrics. So I have been able to learn more about pattern fabrics, fabric names, and different fabric weights and things like that, just by knowing, just by looking on the back of a pattern and seeing different types of fabric. So I learned about a fabric called bengaline, which I'd never really heard of before. I saw it in a particular pattern, and then I got a sample of it, and it's one of my favorite fabrics, and I wouldn't have found that if I hadn't kind of used that pattern. So fabric suggestions are really helpful. The other thing it gives you is the inspiration for ideas and different variations and hacks. So even if you did want to make your own pattern, I often start from something that's very similar and then modify that pattern. So you don't have to make it exactly as it's designed in the pattern. You can do your own variations and make that happen for you. So you can add your own hacks and you can do your own combinations and different things like that. Okay, so they're my benefits, and I think if you're not sold yet, then I'm at a loss. I don't know how I would ever convince you, but I think they do really save you time. And so the downside, really, there are some downsides to using sewing patterns. And I think for me, the biggest downside is that it can be really intimidating. The first time you ever try and open a pattern, then it can be really off-putting to have a look and try and work out which is the right size to make and what the different instructions mean and what the pattern pieces are. And you get quite a lot of stuff. And we're going to go through that today. I'm going to show you a couple of patterns, and I'm going to try and take that intimidation away and just really introduce you to those in a safe environment where you can kind of ask questions and just see those in action. And I'm going to explain a few of those terms, and we're going to be going through those more in the coming weeks. The other thing that's a downside to sewing patterns is that, a bit like with your ready-to-wear clothes, they are designed on very specific measurements and very specific measurement blocks. And if you're not 5'7" and you're not perfectly proportioned and you don't kind of conform to being with a waist 10 inches smaller than your bust and your hips, then it's likely you're going to either need to make some modifications, or you're going to need to use multiple sizes within your pattern. And so we're going through that in the next but one session. We're going to talk about how to make the most of those multiple sizes. The next thing is that they're not all consistent quality either. So you use different patterns and different pattern brands, and some of them have really good instructions and some of them aren't so great, and some of them have really tested their pattern pieces and some maybe not so much. And some are just really well designed. They've got really good pattern drafters, and some maybe not so much. So they're not always equal. But what you'll find by experimenting is that you'll find a brand that is right for you, and that you can kind of get into their style and their ethic and their kind of their designs. And you'll perhaps find one of the brands, particularly with the expansion of the independent brands, you'll probably be able to find one that just really suits your needs. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of that banner. Yeah, so that's what I think the downsides are, and I'd be really interested to know. So add in the comments, if you're watching this in the replay, let me know in the comments how have you found patterns? What do you think is the biggest challenge? If they've put you off, what was it that put you off? What was your experience of doing that? So let me know in the comments kind of what your experience has been. Okay, so if you don't use sewing patterns, then what's the alternative? Well, as I mentioned before, you can draft your own patterns, and the way to do that is there is a set of instructions that you use with your own body measurements, and you often start by drafting a kind of bodice block which is to your measurements, and then from that you can add style variations, you can change necklines, you can create collars, you can create sleeves, you can create all kinds of different things. So you can do that, and it's really flexible because it's designed for your body shape. But in my experience, one of the downsides of that is that you have to really still be conform. The instructions are based on you meeting certain body proportions and doing kind of following certain assumptions. And again, if you don't follow those assumptions, then some of the steps and the measurements that it gets you to use don't necessarily work for every body shape, and you still end up maybe modifying it or adjusting it for fit. You could learn to drape, so you can just create a body form that is your excuse me, your shape and size, and then you can just drape the fabric directly onto the body form, so you don't have to use patterns. You can start with very basic shapes, and you can maybe just make a cylinder and then just modify that, add some darts and things like that. But it does require you to either be able to drape on yourself, which is quite difficult, or to have a mannequin or something like that that's shaped to your body shape and size. And then often you'll end up creating pattern pieces from your shapes, and then you'll need to know how to sew those together. Or you could copy from existing clothes. So you could either take a garment apart, an old garment, or you could maybe trace off a garment. So you can use that for tracing. And then you can do that so that you can create pattern pieces from that garment. And if you know that garment already fits, then you're kind of part of the way there. But if, like me, with ready to wear, even the stuff that sort of fits me doesn't fit me perfectly. So I often struggle even with stuff, and I would still probably need to modify that. And probably for me, the biggest downside of all of those options is that they don't come with instructions. So if you're a beginner or if you're quite new to dressmaking, then it can be really difficult because they don't tell you what order to sew your seams in. They don't tell you how to construct the garment. They don't give you any tips. And so there's kind of a bit of a gap there. So they're great if you're perhaps a little bit more advanced and you've done a bit of sewing. So I think, they're kind of options to consider, but they're definitely out there and they definitely help. And I think maybe a blended combination of all of those is probably the best way to go. Okay, so what kind of patterns do we have? Well, the traditional type of sewing patterns were printed, and I've got some examples here. So this is quite an old one, actually. So this is an old Vogue pattern, and you can see it's a bit 80s in terms of the style. And this is kind of how patterns come generally, printed patterns. So they'll usually be in some kind of envelope, and they'll contain some instructions and some pattern pieces, which I'm going to show you shortly. Okay, so the other way that you can get patterns is in books. So I have a couple of books here. So this is the Tilly and the Button stretch book. This is really great for beginners. She does another book, which is for kind of more basic with woven garments. I love this book. This dress is from that book. This is the Joni dress that I'm wearing today. I just think she does really great patterns for beginners, and it's really helpful. So we'll have a little look in there to see kind of how that looks. And I have another book similar to that, which is Breaking the Pattern, which is, again, very modern pattern styles. And I really like this. I like this book. It's very helpful. And then the third type is that you can get them in magazines. So that's another way that you can get patterns. But often becoming the most common is PDF patterns. So this is where you buy the pattern and get sent the digital pattern that you can either print out at home, or they give you an A0 sheet that you can send to a printer's. And there's lots of printers out there that do that, and we'll perhaps talk about that in a bit more detail in one of the later sessions. And then you can have that printed out. And PDF patterns are great because you don't have to pay shipping or anything like that. And they're kind of immediate, so you can download them, and they come with the instructions and they come with the pattern pieces. And quite often the companies that do those also do some kind of tutorial, so you'll get some information and extra help on how to make those up, so they can be really helpful. Okay, so what kind of pattern types have you tried? Again, let me know in the comments if you're watching the replay. Do you prefer PDF patterns? Have you been put off by those because you don't know how to put them together? Do you like printed patterns? Have you got any books or magazines that you'd recommend? What are your favorite patterns? If you've been using patterns, or you've got had some for a while, are there any kind of go-to ones that you keep going back to? Are there any that you've tried and not really been able to find your way around? Let me know, because I'm always interested. I love patterns, and I'm always interested to get new recommendations. Okay, so let's start to have a look at some of the patterns then, and the anatomy of the pattern itself. So I'm going to start with the printed patterns to get us going, just so that you can see kind of how they come. And the beauty of patterns is that you can get them even like designer patterns. So like this one is Donna Karan designed for Vogue. And so this is a pattern that she created, and there's quite a few of these about where I don't know if you can see that, but you can see Donna Karan's designed this for Vogue, and there's a few others like that. Vashli Mishka and some other designers have designed for some of the pattern brands, and so it's worth looking out for those, because they're going to be fabulous garments because they're by well-known designers. Okay, so it's worth having a look for those. All right, so I'm just going to switch my camera so that I can show you the next part. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to open up some of these patterns, and I'm going to show you some of the details within them. Okay, so within here we've got, so I'm going to start with, let's start with this simplicity one because that's nice and easy. So I haven't used this one yet. So let's just talk about the anatomy of the pattern. So on the front of the pattern, you'll often get some kind of design. Now, this is great because this has got a photograph with the lady wearing the pattern. But some of the ones, I don't think we've got any examples here, just have kind of pictures or drawn images. So like with this one, sometimes they just have this kind of sketch on there. Now, that's great from a design point of view, but it does mean that it's quite tricky if you are trying to imagine that on a real person. So in this case, you've got the best of both worlds. You can see the two design options done with those two, one with a photograph and one with a sketch. But I would always try and find patterns that have some kind of photograph on there so that you can kind of see it on a real person. So once you've got that, so going back to that, so they'll often have the pattern brand. So this one's Simplicity. We've got other ones here for like McCall's or for Vogue. And so the different pattern brands will have the name on them. And then they'll usually have some name or number that identifies that specific pattern. So this one's 8543. And that's just so that if you're searching for that, you'll be able to find this exact pattern. Also on the front of the envelope, it will tell you what sizes that it goes from. So this goes from a US, let me just hold that up for you, a US size 10 to 18. And there's some more details on the back. But I did just want to show you one example here where, so this is the same pattern. So this is the Butterick 5898. And on this pattern, you've got two, it looks like the same envelope, but actually this first envelope you'll see covers sizes extra small to extra large, but their range has a plus size because it's by Connie Crawford. And here you'll see this pattern envelope contains the sizes XXL to 6X. So if you were looking for a 2X size and you got this pattern envelope, which is the smaller one, then it wouldn't contain those pattern pieces. So when you're buying, you just need to make sure that even though the size range might go from, and I'll show you where you can see the size range, but even though the size range might be broader, they don't always include all the pattern pieces in the same envelope. This is particularly true of things like Vogue patterns, where they used to just group, particularly in the older patterns, they used to just group maybe 3 sizes in the pattern envelope. So you'd maybe only get pattern sizes 6, 8, 10, and then there'd be another envelope for 12, 14, 16. So particularly if you're buying patterns online or older patterns, then make sure you look for the pattern sizes that particular envelope contains. Okay, so that's the front of the pattern. And then on the back of the pattern, there's quite a few little gems. So there'll often be, let me pick one that's got a description on it to help us. Okay, so on this pattern, I don't know whether you can see that very well, but you can see that at the top of the pattern, we've got this description. So it tells us that it's a Mrs. jacket with a belt, detachable collar and skirt. And it gives us some details of the fit and the fact that it's lined, it has pockets, and then it tells you a bit about some of the other design variations. So I ought to have said on the front of the pattern, you'll see the different style variations. So in this case, we've got a coat and a skirt. I think they are trousers or a long skirt. And so you'll see that you've got A to F, basically, the different styles. And then if we look on the back, we can also see those styles represented with the technical drawings. So these black and white drawings here are the technical drawings, and they'll tell you what each of the styles are. So in this case, the jacket comes in 2 lengths. There's the detachable collar, and then there's 2 skirt lengths as well. And so it's really useful to kind of have a look at that on the pattern, because you'll see now that that collar isn't actually part of the pattern. It's like an extra detail or an extra feature, which maybe wasn't obvious from the front of the pattern. They also try and give you some guide as to what body shapes it will work with or what it's suitable for. But in all honesty, it tends to give these same body shapes for every single pattern. I don't think I've ever seen one where it doesn't say that, because they want to sell it to as many people as possible. Okay, so the other information that we're going to see on here on the back is you'll see some suggested fabrics. So down here we've got fabrics called, I'm just trying to hold this steady. We've got fabrics which are wool gabardine, tweed, faux fur, And then as a contrast, faux leather or faux suede for the collar, and then poplins or satins for the skirts. And then they can also work with a moderate stretch knit like a ponte. So it gives you the names of the fabrics and tells you whether it will work with a nap or not. So a nap is something like a velvet, where it has a direction. When you stroke it, you kind of stroke it in one direction or not. It also tells you here all the notions that you're going to need. So these are the extra things that you might need. So in this case, for the skirt, you're going to need a zip and a hook and eye. And for F, whatever F is, you're going to need some elastic. Okay, so that gives you some information about the fabrics. And then in addition to that, then we've got some tables here, and on quite a lot of patterns you've got that in English and in French, and the English measurement usually is in imperial and the French measurement is usually in metric. And so what we're looking at here first of all is what you need to find out is what size you want to be for the pattern, and to do that you're going to take some basic measurements. And so the measurements that you want are your bust, waist and hip measurement. I'm just going to try and extract this from, and in this case on this Vogue pattern, if I can hold this for you, they're shown on the top flap of the pattern. If you can see that, let me just see if I can get that into focus. There we go. So you can see that we've got sizes 8, 10 and 12, and then it tells you that for a size 8, for example, it's a 31.5 inch bust with a 24 inch waist and a 33.5 inch hip. So you can see that the sizing here, my experience is that the sizing in patterns, commercial sewing patterns, particularly for the older, like the big 4 original brands, is often smaller than your traditional ready to wear. So if you're normally a size 14 in ready to wear, then you might be a size 16 or 18 in a sewing pattern. So it is worth checking your measurements and looking at whatever your biggest measurement is. Make sure that that is catered for in the size range that they've got here. We are going to be talking more about how to use those sizes, and I'm going to help you work out how to choose the right size for your patterns based on your measurements in one of the later sessions. But for now, if you just take your kind of hip, waist and bust measurement roughly, and then that will give you an idea whether this pattern size is going to work for you. Once you know that, then the next thing that you're going to do is be able to choose your fabrics. And so here it tells you for each pattern size how much fabric you're going to need for each of the designs. And so each of them is listed separately, and it tells you what fabrics you're going to need to make those different things up. And if you not many places in the UK particularly sell fabric by the yard, so you might struggle with these, but if you can kind of work your way across to this side, then it will tell you how many meters that you need. And this is probably the easiest measurement to use if you're choosing fabrics. So the other thing that it's telling us on this pattern is that it's easy. So again, it's kind of like a beginner's pattern. And I think although it looks like quite advanced, this pattern is relatively straightforward. It's great for a beginner. And quite a lot of the patterns will tell you that sort of on the front of the pattern. Okay, so let's just quickly have a look inside. Oh, sorry, one more thing to mention is that on some patterns, if I can just turn this the right way around, if it's a pattern designed for stretch fabric, it will often have one of these stretch guides on. And the idea of this is that you take your fabric and hold that distance of fabric, so you kind of measure that out, and then you try and, with holding this end in place, try and stretch this end. And if it will go as far as this point here, then that has enough stretch. And if it won't, then it doesn't. So if you've got a low stretch fabric, this isn't quite a lot of stretch here. This is designed for a kind of medium stretch. But if you've got quite a low stretch fabric, then it might not, it will work for this pattern, but it might not work longer term for what you want for some of the other patterns. But they'll sometimes have that stretch guide on there. I'm just going to try and get that back in focus. There we go. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is look at the contents of this. So let me take the contents out of this one. So imagine that you've got this pattern for the first time and you are just using this pattern. So the first thing you're going to do after you've worked through all of these numbers and gone through all of the information on the pattern envelope, then the next thing you're going to do is have a look at the patterns. And this is where it can be a bit intimidating. So a friend of mine said to me that one of the things that she worries about is that these patterns are in tissue paper, and this is quite delicate, so you can see it's kind of designed to be a bit see-through, and it can be quite delicate. And so if you're working with these pattern pieces, sometimes it can be a bit worrying that you might rip it or break it or do something along those lines. But let me tell you, that is what sticky tape's for. So if you've got sellotape, even if you think you're going to make a mistake, keep the pieces that you cut off and just store them away in case you cut a bit off that you shouldn't have done. And then you won't go wrong. Just sellotape is great. You can stick them back together if there's a problem. We're also going to cover in the next session about how to trace off patterns so that you don't even have to cut these out in that level of detail. So I'm going to cover that. So make sure you tune in next week to see that. I'm going to give you some quick tips on how to do that and how to get the most out of your patterns and keep them in a great format. So when you open it, you get these pattern pieces. And then you also get some instructions. Now, I think this is where most people get put off. So the first thing that you see when you open the instruction is loads of pictures and lots of diagrams and lots of numbers and letters and things like that. And particularly for this one, because this pattern is actually graded for different cup sizes. So in this case, depending on what cup size you are, whether you're a B, C, D or double D, will depend on which pattern pieces you choose. So it looks even more complicated, but it's definitely not that bad. When you know what you're looking for and you just need some tricks of the trade, then this will really help you to know exactly how to hone in on the information that you need. The other thing that I think is off-putting about these patterns sometimes is, again, that as you open these instructions out, they're on this big sheet and they've tried to cram in as much as possible, but it can make it at first glance look really confusing. So as I'm opening this out, and I bet you, if you haven't looked at patterns before, you're thinking, oh my goodness, it looks like it's designed for making a rocket ship, not for making a garment. But again, if you breathe and just work through the steps one by one, then they are really straightforward and easy to follow. But you'll need a few kind of tips and guidance on how to do that, and we're going to cover that as we go through these sessions. Okay, so let's just talk about a few of the parts of this pattern. So as you open it up, just find the sheet that I want to show you. That one. I just want to give you a few bits of information that are on the pattern. Okay, so the first thing is that you're going to get the technical drawing that we talked about, so that you're going to use this to decide what style you want to make. And this is like a kind of spot the difference sort of competition where you're going to see, you're going to need to try and work out what's the difference between these different images. So to give you a bit of a clue, the first one, obviously it's the different sleeve types. So this has got different sleeve variations for these ones. And then these are just the back views for these different variations. So the first thing that you're going to do is decide, well, what do I want to make? Do I want to make one with sleeves or without sleeves? And then you're going to be looking for, if say you want to make it without sleeves, you're just going to be looking for everything that refers to style A or version A. Then you'll also often have some general instructions, which are these bits here. And these are the same on quite a lot of patterns. And this is really just a key to how to use the pattern. So all this is trying to tell you is, what do all these different symbols and expressions and different bits of information mean that you can then use within the pattern? So some common things are, they denote kind of what the grain line is. We're going to talk about that later. They tell you how they've made notches. They tell you what the seam allowance is. This is really important. So in this case, it's 5/8. They give you some basic instructions. But once you've read this bit and you understand it, you don't really need to refer back to it. It's really just trying to give you a guide to say, when you look at the pictures, this means the right side or the wrong side. And these are some general things to know kind of about using this pattern. So again, you can read through those. You don't have to memorize it, but they'll be familiar with a lot of different patterns. Then at the bottom, in this case, it's talking about how to choose the pattern size. So because this one has different cup sizes, so you can see it's for bust, different cup sizes, it's basically telling you how to work out your cup size. So this isn't common on all patterns, but quite useful in this example. So again, it's just trying to guide you through how to decide what size to make. And then on this side, this is probably the one that looks a bit more complicated, I think, because it's quite technical drawings. But all this is showing you is how to lay the pattern pieces out, depending on what width of fabric you're using and what style you're using. So you don't need to worry too much about, again, about memorizing these, but as you fold the fabric or as you get your fabric out, depending on how much fabric you've bought and the width of your fabric, then it's going to tell you how to lay out your different pattern pieces. Okay, so that's kind of the first part of the pattern. And then the next part is really the instructions, and the instructions are very similar for each pattern. So they'll guide you through, and usually when you're making a pattern, this is a good example. So this is for the dress. So you'll have some pictures down one side, and then you'll have some instructions down the main part of the pattern. And they try to put in bold where they're using terms that they've defined on that first page. With many things, it will kind of give you a guide as to where your stitch lines are. It will try and show you the right side and the wrong side. So in this case, the dark represents the right side of the fabric and the light colour represents the wrong side of the fabric. And you'll often be assembling the front piece, any bits to go with the front piece first, and then any bits to go with the back piece, and then assembling the front to the back at the shoulders, and then sewing the side seams. And that's kind of the steps that it's going through here. Okay, but again, we'll be going through these in more detail as we start to use the patterns. So the last thing are the pattern pieces themselves. So whenever I get a new pattern, what I'm often doing is just opening the pattern out, and I'll cut out the individual pattern pieces just roughly so that I can work with them. And again, this is what we're going to be covering in next week's session. So this is a pattern piece. You'll see it's kind of on this tracing paper, and it's got some instructions on it. It's got some little markings on it. We're going to go through those. It's got this grain line that we mentioned earlier. It has the pattern number, pattern piece number on it, and the brand and everything else. So all the details that you need are contained on this pattern piece. But again, it can look quite confusing if you've not used these before. But once you know what this means, this little triangle, and what this line means, and what this information is telling you, then that's the same for the majority of patterns. So you only really have to learn that once, and then once you've learned that, you can apply it to every other sewing pattern. Okay, so that just makes it easier for you to get to learn it. And whilst it might be daunting the first time you do it, it's definitely worth it to just learn the little secrets of it to start with, and then you can apply that to a wide variety of patterns. So just in contrast, then I just want to show you one more thing before we wrap up, and that is this pattern book. This is one example. So this is a Tilly pattern book, and in here, all the patterns are kind of in the back of the book, and they are printed on this paper. And in this case, because I think they're printed on both sides, you would have to trace off these patterns, and that's what we're going to go through next week. But I just wanted to show you that with some of the independent patterns, you do get a bit more helpful instructions. And she does these kind of booklets, not this book, but even the booklets that she does with her patterns have this level of detail in. They have photographs and things like that. So if we look for a pattern for this dress, for example, let's just try and find one. So she gives you some tips and tricks for working with different fabrics. She gives you some instructions on how to pin it, how to assemble it. And there's lots of pictures and photographs of the actual garment going together. She also does, I think, some video tutorials and things like that. So some of the newer pattern brands are doing more kind of instructions like this, where you can see a bit better and a bit more clearly how to do it. But then she still also gives you the description at the side kind of as you're going along. Okay, so that gives you hopefully an introduction. I'll just change my camera back. That gives you an introduction to pattern pieces and patterns, and hopefully that's helped explain how to get started and not really put you off. So the idea of this is to show you that there's such a variety, and there's so many great designs and so many great styles, and they contain a lot of really useful information. If you can just put your fear aside for 5 minutes while you kind of learn just some of the anatomy of the pattern and how to work with it, then I totally think it's worth doing that, and very rewarding to do so. And so let me know in the comments, how do you feel about sewing patterns now? Has it kind of inspired you? Has it given you some ideas? Has it taken away a little bit of the fear? Are you excited about getting started using sewing patterns? If you've used them before, then the next few stages are going to be take you kind of a bit more advanced, and we're going to particularly with the fitting sessions. We're going to talk about how we can adjust these patterns and get a really great fit for your body. But we're going to start that and kick that off next week by going through how to trace off the patterns so that you can keep these original ones intact. Why you would want to do that, and how you can go about that in the quickest way. I'm also going to talk you through how to assemble a PDF pattern if you want to use PDF patterns and you haven't been doing that. So make sure you tune in or catch it on the replay. Let me know in the comments. And if there's anything I haven't covered today that you'd like to see, then please let me know. I'm going to wrap that up for now. Thank you so much for those that attended live. I haven't been able to see your comments, I'm afraid. So if you have commented, then I will update those in the Facebook group, and I'll do a bit more practicing with the technology. And I hope to see a lot more of you next time. Bye for now.